Okay, and we should be live in just a couple of secs. Let's see. And I guess we're live. Good evening, everybody. Sorry for a couple of minutes of being late, but here we are. Good evening to everybody who is listening to us, who is watching us on Facebook, on YouTube, on Spotify. My name is Anna Wilczyńska. I run the initiative called Salam Lab, which you probably know since you're here. And it is my great pleasure tonight to introduce my special guest, Archbishop Antje Jackelén. Archbishop Jackelén is from Church of Sweden. She's the head of Church of Sweden since 2014. Before she was the Bishop of Lund, she's also the professor of systematic theology, religion and science, and she got that degree at the Lutheran School of Theology in Chicago. The Archbishop is also an author of multiple books. Some of them are Together in Hope from 2016. Also, God is Greater, Theology of the World from 2020. And Impatient in Hope. I guess that's connected with the times we have now with the pandemic. That's also 2020. The Archbishop is also a Nordic Vice President of Lutheran World Federation and co-president of Religious for Peace, and the founder of a great network that I'm also a part of, A World of Neighbors, a network of activists, practitioners, and leaders taking care of people on the move, so migrants and refugees in Europe. Archbishop Jackelén, thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon, and welcome to Salam Lab.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for that generous introduction.
Well, to all of our listeners and viewers tonight, this is one of our first conversations in English. We're usually trying to be most accessible for Polish-speaking audience. So if you're new here, welcome. Not only be our guest tonight, but also feel like you are a host in this place. This is a place of diversity and openness. So please make yourself comfortable, but also take responsibility for your words and your actions here in this space. From the very beginning of our conversation, I would like to encourage all of you to take part in the discussion in the comment section. And today with Archbishop Jackelén, we're going to speak about women, leadership, religion, and peace, also counteracting violence in religious communities. So a lot of very important questions, a lot of very tough questions, and very relevant to not only religious communities, but all of us in the world today. So I'm really looking forward to all of you participating in the discussion. I can already see there's a lot of great comments, and there's a lot of you saying hi and good evening in the comments to both of us. So thank you very much for participating. And one last thing before we start with the questions, if you feel comfortable listening to the conversation in English, but you don't feel quite comfortable asking your question in English, you can write that in Polish in the comment section, and I'll do my best to translate that question in English to our guest tonight, to Archbishop Jackelén. And we'll do our best to add subtitles on YouTube, Polish subtitles, so that all of you can follow our conversation later. So without further ado, Archbishop Jackelén, once again, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I would like to start with a question about female leadership, about your leadership as well. A lot of times when I myself am being asked, so how did it happen that you're in this place, that you are a practitioner, that you're trying to be a leader in your community? I'm quite puzzled, and I said, well, I don't know, maybe it was a coincidence. And then I catch myself and I say, no, it was not a coincidence, and a female leadership is not and should not be something that we consider that just happens and that it's something that it's maybe not planned, and it's not very important. So I try to catch myself in this moment and tell myself that, well, female leadership is something that we need to think about, and we need to plan, and we need to be ready for. And because of that, I would like to ask you, what was your way of becoming a leader? You are a first female in history of Church of Sweden to be on, well, such a high position in a church. So what was that way of leadership for you? How did it happen that you become such a wonderful and strong leader of your religious community?
Well, it wasn't planned. Of course, you can never apply to become a bishop. You are elected and so on. And of course, it didn't happen by coincidence either. I think when I was young, I didn't think of myself as a leader very much. I didn't reflect so much about it. But something that was important in my path was, I think that was in the beginning of the 90s, and I was about 35 years old, and I was offered a course on women and leadership. And it was then I was at that time a parish priest, and it was the diocese who was offering this course for women. And I was hesitant. At that point, I thought, no, you shouldn't have a course just for women. That seems strange. But then I applied, and I was admitted to the course. And then something happened. I realized that I was very much standing on the shoulders of women who had been there and struggled before me. Thinking of the first generation of female priests in our church, but also in a more general way. And I thought I didn't have to struggle the way they had, and that was because they had sacrificed things. So I learned that the story of these pioneers is something to cherish. And I also afterwards, looking back at that course, quite a number of the women, I think we were about 15 women, actually ended up in positions of leadership. So there is something about the conscious training of women that also pays off. But also remember that during that course, we were encouraged to write a diary, to reflect on leadership, on our practice and our thoughts, and even pay attention to our dreams. And I remember that at that point, I thought, I always dreamt stories where I was just the one who was watching. Others were leading, I was watching. And I felt, no, I'm never going to be a leader. So I don't know what that means, but what that meant. But anyway, I was affirmed in many ways, and I also reflected on this fact that women tend to be more prone to wait until they are asked to take responsibility, rather than stepping forward or by themselves and offering their competence and skills. They're more often waiting to be discovered, so to speak. And I guess it's one of the skills to be honed to step forward when there is the right time. Because it still is the case, I think, that if women step forward, they're considered to be pushy in a way that a man in that situation wouldn't be considered to be. And there, of course, the role of networks comes in, sisterhood. And it seems to me that networking among women works pretty well when you are at the same level. But it also happens that when one sister, so to speak, climbs to a higher level, that not all of the other sisters are very fond of that. So I think we need to cultivate our ways of networking together, and also supporting each other in different roles, even when the roles change. And I think one of the, if that is a weakness, I think the reason for this weakness is that we as women in general, we don't have generations of professional women to fall back on. Men can always think, oh, there have been generations of professional people just in my branch before, and I can rely sort of unconsciously on that experience. Women, even if they have 2 or 3 or 4 generations of women being before, it's still sort of newcomers. And that implies, or that means, I think, that we, this is generalizing, of course, that we are more dependent on affirmative feedback. I remember in connection with that course I was talking about, I did some practice at a health clinic that worked with health issues related to workplaces in general. And I was there to study like the interplay between the leader, the boss, and the employees. And one question I asked all the employees, men and women, was, do you get enough feedback from your boss? And it was striking that women often replied, oh yes, I get some feedback, but really it could be a little more. Whereas the men typically said, feedback, I haven't thought about it, but yeah, that's okay. It's good enough for the wage I get. So I mean, they were reflecting this, well, I'm so self-evident in this role, why should I bother? If he doesn't say anything, he must be okay. Whereas the women were looking for this positive information all the time. And I think that's a sign of this, that we still have as women to sort of conquer this, the self-evident, the claiming the self-evident. And I think that is often a key to gender equality, to claiming the self-evident, that which is not yet self-evident, but it should be. And that has been my key to, especially to survive in contexts where I'm the only woman or one of very few women. Oh, I'm getting long here, so you must interrupt me.
No, that's wonderful. That's actually great. That's very interesting what you said, and very true when it comes to women leading religious communities. I guess for our listeners and viewers who are Polish and have a Catholic background, that must be something totally new for you, seeing a woman who is a priest, who is a Archbishop, who is in charge of the church. If you have any questions around that topic, please leave them in the comment section under this transmission. But yeah, it's definitely what you said, that as women in religious communities, we have nearly no, like, what men would call tradition of becoming leaders in religion, and also working in Muslim communities. Some countries would have centuries of traditions of women being in charge of certain things, but usually we have to struggle to look for those pioneers who were there before us, just to, again, try to justify us being in the position of any power. So that's definitely very, very
and
true.
you know, we have some very great pioneers. I happened to see a caricature today that related to Easter. It was this simple picture, with simple drawing, and in the left-hand side of the picture there were 3 women, and on the right-hand side of the picture there were like 20 men, and dressed in the clothes we think they had at Jesus' time. And then was the text said, was the men talking, of course. The text said, "So, ladies, thank you very much for being the first to witness and report the resurrection of Lord Jesus. We'll take it from here." And you see, it needed 20 men or more to take it from 3 women who were the first witnesses of the resurrection. I mean, women were the first in all Gospels. Women were the first to receive the news and spread the news of the resurrected Jesus Christ. So we have some great pioneers to lean on. It's just that the guys tried to take it from there.
I guess it's also true for Muslim community, because Sunnis tend to believe that it was Khadija, the first wife of the Prophet Muhammad, who was the first actual believer, who was the first witness of him being a prophet. And yeah, it was pretty much the same. The men took it from there.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Yeah, we can all look for those pioneers to support our positions on.
And I think it's important to affirm our own sense of calling. I mean, if God is calling men and women to serve, then the vocation of women need to be affirmed as well. And that has always been important to me, to find some rest in, okay, this is my vocation that has been affirmed, and I walk with it.
And I know that in the Church of Sweden you have quite a unique way of decision making, that there's a certain division between men, women, and young people, that there's like a quota that each decision needs to be made by a certain percentage of men, women, and young people. And how do women in leadership position change this decision making process? What do they bring to the decision making?
Well, yeah, let me first say, what we are trying to get there, it's actually something we learned from the Lutheran World Federation, which is a federation of most of the Lutheran churches throughout the world, which has this quota system. At least 40% men, at least 40% women, and at least 20% youth. And I can tell you, sometimes it's very tricky, and you often hear, oh, there are not enough young people, oh, there are not enough women. That's very common. It used to be very common, but now there are, I don't know exactly how many years of experience. It really settles and becomes normal. It's no longer the exception. Oh yeah, we need to look for young people. We need to look for women or lay people. It becomes a way of looking at the whole of reality. I used to be very much opposed to quotas. I thought it was a bad way of organizing things, but in this case, it was a learning process for the whole communion that has been very healthy. So in the decision-making bodies of the communion, we have this 40-40-20. But in the Church of Sweden, I'm sorry to say, we haven't yet got there, but we are reminding us. Now, when it comes to the influence or the significance of involving women in decision-making, that is a little tricky question, because it's easy to end up in this essentialist pitfall, so that you ascribe women certain things that not every woman has. I mean, not women do not always behave like the standard concept of woman, and men do not behave according to the standard concept of a man. So sometimes it's said, oh, when women are included in decision making, it gets softer, it gets more gentle, it gets more practical. it gets more embodied, it takes more account of emotions, and it's easier to promote a child perspective in decision making. There may be something to it, but of course it would be bad if you would delegate the practical dimensions, the embodied dimensions, the child perspective to women alone. So what it's really about is to have as many perspectives as possible. And of course, I mean, if you exclude, per definition, 50% of the population from leadership positions, you diminish the pool of possible leaders significantly. And that, I think, that is a waste with the gifts that God has given.
And actually, there are some people in the comment section who are asking exactly what I asked you just a second ago. Anya, which is one of our collaborators, she asked, what do you think about the introduction of quotas as a remedy for the low participation of women in political or social life? So thank you very much for the answer to that already. And Anya also asked, is it maybe better to wait for women to get into politics or leadership positions to give them time to like grow into those positions? What do you think about that?
Well, of course, growth is always good, but what exactly is enough growth? Because a lot of growth happens once you are there, right? So there's not an easy answer. I remember when I first was elected bishop, and I actually I succeeded the first ever female bishop in the Church of Sweden, and so people said to me, "You have big shoes to fill. These are big shoes to fill to succeed her." And I just got the thought, I just said, oh, I guess I will bring my own shoes. And I think that's what we have to do, right? To learn from our predecessors, but at some point you always have to bring your own shoes. So when is the right moment that you're ready to have shoes to bring? I think there's no general answer to it. And well, look at how men are building capacity. I think an important point here is to so among women build capacity, network, and support so that women can be comfortable in positions of leadership. And also be aware, I mean, unfortunately, in many respects, when women are in the minority or the first or second generation, they are still forced to deliver more and better and quicker and all of that. So I sometimes think that yeah, there is a cost to being the first Archbishop as well in that respect. But then again, I think you will always, as a pioneer, you will always find that there are many people who want to support you as well. And that in leadership positions, there is always also the aspect that many people, I mean, I think that's human. We want our leaders to be good. We want to be proud of our leaders. And actually that desire, in a sense, is also strength when you are in a position of leadership, because it gives you a sense of humility, but also a sense of support. And I think cultivating both humility and courage, they're not opposites, they are partners. If you can cultivate both of them, then you're actually in a good position.
And speaking about networking and support, let me give you a quick ad. to a great network that you yourself built around the Church of Sweden, but not only Church of Sweden. To all of our listeners and viewers, go check out on Facebook and Instagram an initiative called A World of Neighbors. If you're often here, you've probably heard of it before. It's a network of different kinds of leaders, but also practitioners taking care of and accompanying people on the move, so migrants and refugees reaching Europe, but not only. If you're interested in migration and in helping people seeking refuge in Europe, and you're interested in migrants and refugees speaking about themselves and their own experience of being welcomed in Europe, go check out A World of Neighbors. As I said, this is a great network. Also, as a practitioner of this network, I learned a lot and gained a lot of support from practitioners from all over the world. And this is a network established by Archbishop Jackelén in the Church of Sweden. So if you're interested, find A World of Neighbors on Facebook and Instagram and give them your love, your support, your likes, your comments. So definitely check that out. Coming back to the comment section, we have quite a number of questions to Archbishop. There's a question from Marta. What other difficulties you had to overcome to be in this place where you are right now? And what important events have influenced your choice and also the choice of other bishops to choose you as an Archbishop of the Church of Sweden?
It's a great question, yet not so easy to answer. Well, I think one element certainly is openness to the possibilities that arise. I worked as a parish priest for like 16 years. But then also I started to do doctoral studies. And when I had finished my doctorate, I was sort of thinking, what's the way forward? In a sense, I thought, I don't think that academia is really my place. In a sense, I do want to serve the church, but what should I do? And then I received from the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago an invitation to submit my CV for a position. And it was a position that I thought, wow, who is going to replace that person who is retiring? I never could imagine myself in that position. So, well, I submitted my CV, and then I wanted to interview me, and I said, well, there we find out. And eventually I was offered the position, and then I had to make this choice for my whole family. Should we actually move to Chicago? Not for a Swedish company working there some years, but really cut the bonds and move there. And it was a very difficult decision to make. We made this list about pluses and minuses, which is quite a good thing. But for every plus we found a minus. For every minus we found a plus. So, but then my husband read a book by Thomas Merton, and he said in some place, it is our duty, in a sense, our moral obligation as people of faith to cooperate with the grace that is offered to us. And that sort of took a hold of us. We said, okay, we can't stand in the pulpit and preach that God is a God of surprises. And we ourselves said, well, thank you, no surprise for us. We know what we have. We're not going to move. So we thought, this is cooperating with the grace that is offered to us to take this step in faith. And we did, and it was not always easy, but it was a very important journey. I learned so much, and I think that prepared me, because I had no idea what was to come after, but it prepared me very well for becoming a bishop, and eventually also for becoming an archbishop. So I didn't plan it. say I felt I was guided by it, but what I contributed was the responsiveness and the curiosity and the willingness to test both myself, but also the opportunities, the path. I think that's the best answer I can get at.
Yeah, that's actually great. Thank you very much for that answer. We have a growing trend in the comment section of people who would like to learn more about the theological aspects and differences between Catholic Church and Church of Sweden. I guess that's going to be a very long topic, so maybe we might save that for later.
Very long.
But
Well,
speaking about let's say, also differences, but things that we have in common, maybe. There is Radek, who is one of the people really strong supporting our initiative, and a person who is also supporting us financially on the Patreon platform. And Radek is saying, good evening. Do you experience any challenges when cooperating with other Christian communities, especially those that may not recognize women as priests yet? So speaking about those differences and maybe some also common points on theological aspects, maybe we can take it from that perspective. Do you see any challenges cooperating with other Christian communities, especially those like Catholic Church in Poland not seeing women as priests and leaders?
Well, yes, it depends, of course. I mean, we have between Lutherans and Catholics, we have a lot in common, and maybe I just should draw our attention to the joint commemoration of 500 years of Reformation, 2016, that actually happened in Lund in Sweden, when the leadership of the Lutheran World Federation and the leadership of the Roman Catholic Church, that is the Vatican and Pope Francis, together invited to come to joint prayer service in the Cathedral of Lund. And myself, together with the Catholic Cardinal here in Sweden, we were the local hosts. And that was a great moment of ecumenism. I think it was a historical moment. We all know that Lutherans and Catholics have written awful things about each other, actually as awful as hate speech on the internet can be today. And from that, moving on to signing on to 5 ecumenical imperatives that we want to realize together. And there was a little book, From Conflict to Communion. If you're really interested in this journey of ecumenism, I would recommend that book. It's available online, From Conflict to Communion. And it concludes with these 5 imperatives about how we can together witness with word and deeds to the gospel of Christ in the world. So that's the good story. But then, as we all know, the church is populated by human beings, with both great moments and less great moments, and great characters and characters that are not that great. So I run both into this positive curiosity, this, officially we don't recognize each other's ministries, but come on, you're a great Archbishop, let's talk. Or in Orthodox circles, I've never been photographed with such enthusiasm together with men, because they find it a little bit exotic. So there is curiosity. But I think whenever we realize that we have a mission together in the world, then we can work together and have this overlapping consensus. And that is important to use as capital that we can do something good from, and which I think is really in line with the will of God, with the saving will of God for this world. And then there are moments when I can get very frustrated and angry.
Speaking about this way from conflict to communion, we said in a description that we're going to talk about religion, and peace as well, and counteracting violence in religious communities. So I wanted to ask you also, what can be done in religious communities, and maybe you have a lot of experience in that, to make sure that peace in counteracting violence and hate speech is more important than excluding, because we not only do that to each other, like Catholics to others, and maybe Muslims to others, and Jews to others, but also we do it in our communities, like inside of our communities. Do you have any remedies to that? What can be done so that the peace is always this value that is more important than division and then violence between us?
Yeah. I think that religious communities and institutions, of course, are affected by the destructive forces that are at work in the world. I have, unfortunately, I have to repeat this so often because it's still there. What I call the poisonous cocktail of 5 dangerous P's, namely polarization, populism, protectionism, post-truth, and patriarchy. And these 5 ingredients, they make up for a synergy that can be very destructive, and that of course also is affecting faith communities. They are not immune to this. And patriarchy is, as we know, quite a common trait in faith communities, and there are several reasons for that. And patriarchy is conducive to even some of these other features: polarization, populism, protectionism, and sometimes even post-truth. So I think a good analysis of what is going on is good, but also then thinking about the remedies. How can we replace post-truth with truth? How can we replace patriarchy with real equality? We really take seriously that we are created equal in the image of God. And how can we counteract these polarizing things? I often think of Archbishop Desmond Tutu's words about religion being like a knife. You can use a knife to cut bread and feed your neighbor, but you can also use a knife to stab your neighbor to death. So religion in itself, faith in itself, is not always a protection against evil. It can also be used in the service of evil things. And that goes for secular ideologies, of course, as well. So I think fostering a good sense of self-criticism and criticism, fostering a dialogue that is respectful, where we actually can ask questions of each other and ponder together what is the right way to do. I think that are ways that are important. I've sometimes talked about a framework of resilience, coexistence, and hope that is important. I think we might have learned throughout the pandemic something about the necessity of resilience, cultivate resilience, and that helps us to make sense of all the fights that women and men are enduring for the health, well-being, and future of their children. And it will also help us to confront polarization and to resist populism and to counteract protectionism that puts the the best for oneself, one's own group before the common good. And we will also then be able to fight against post-truth and hopefully overcome patriarchy. And I think the second one, coexistence, will help us to revisit some of the borders that are so harmful to our working and living together. And unfortunately, we have been seeing counter tendencies, not coming together, living together, but actually raising borders and all that kind of stuff. But it also it applies to our relationship to nature, of course. With this framework of coexistence, we were able to foster more adequate views of nature and listen to the groaning of creation, as the Apostle Paul says, and be much better at addressing climate change and to do it in a holistic way. And hope, finally, I think many of the evil things we are seeing are actually an expression of too much fear and too little hope. Behind much of destructive behavior is the question, what can we really hope for? What can we really hope for? And as I have pondered that question in my latest book, Impatient in Hope, Theological Questions in the Shadow of the Pandemic, I ended up with a hope with 3 ingredients. And I think a hope, to be credible, must be able to harbor anger, frustration about all that is not as it should be. Hope must be able to harbor that. And the second ingredient is, as I said before, humility, a sense of reality that can affirm both our strength, our creativity, but also our weakness, our destructive potential, and our vulnerability and our mortality. And the third is courage, because in most situations, we still have a choice between the courageous path and the less courageous path. And I think these 3 things, the ability to harbor anger and a realistic sense of what our place in creation is, that is humility, and cultivating courage, will actually help us to keep up hope as a creative power that empowers us and helps us to empower each other.
Yeah, I guess these 3 ingredients, this is something we definitely need, especially right now in the times of pandemic. I hope that the book Impatient in Hope is going to be soon translated, so that also Polish readers can get to it, because I guess it's only in Swedish now. Is there going to be an English version?
There is with the introductory chapter is actually published in Poland somewhere. I don't know whether it's published in English or the English translation was translated in Polish. I think it's translated. It's published in English, and there will be another chapter that will be published in English as well. But we're looking for the possibility to have the whole book translated into English at least.
Wonderful. So we're looking forward to that, and I see already that our viewers found the Polish version of From Conflict to Communion. So great, please use that, read that, and spread that among yourselves. I also wanted to ask you, what can especially women do in resolving conflict and bringing peace? Because I have this experience of being in Syria in 2017, and together with Carol, we went to Aleppo. That was the time that the siege of Aleppo just ended, and we saw that, and we were also said by people who've done some research there that there was 12 women for one man in Aleppo at that time, because so many men would go to the army or were forced to be in the army. So many of them died, so many of them left to neighboring countries or to Europe, to Africa, to North America as well. So it was mostly just women, elderly, and young children who were left there. And so many people would say that it's always been a responsibility of women to bring peace. It's the men who are fighting, who are bringing the war, but it's the women who bring the peace. And I always thought, this is so unfair, that it's usually those who are innocent that they have to work to bring the peace back. Maybe you have any other thoughts and comments about this. Is it supposed to be like that it's the women who are supposed to bring peace?
Yeah, that is a good question. And as you say that, I'm reminded of what I have learned about what happened in my native country, Germany, after World War II. I mean, during the war, the women were home. They took care of the kids. They took care of work life as well. They ran businesses and everything. And then after the war, men came home. They were deeply traumatized, but there was no care for post-traumatic stress syndrome or anything. They came home and they thought that they were the bosses at home. And they had a broken relationship with their wives, with their children. And they tried to make up for that by like exercising power. And there was a saying that, well, now that the war is over, the war has moved into the families. So this dynamic of peace and war is a very sad one. Well, generally speaking, of course, you need both women and men to make peace. It takes both. And traditionally, you put the men at the table to negotiate peace, but the women should be there as well. You can't exclude half the population and think you are making peace for the whole population. That is not going to work. So again, it is important to build capacity, to create networks, and to make things and structures visible, especially the unfair structures. Since I was in academia for a number of years, it struck me that men quote men. And, for a researcher, being quoted is quite important. But men often unconsciously quote men. So I took I always nowadays look at the bibliography when I read a book. And, well, is this all male? Are there women or not? And like last fall, I met a person who is like attributed as a top philosopher, star philosopher, and has written a book like this. And I think there are 2 or 3 women in that book, and like 2 of them are mentioned for what they don't do well, and 1 is mentioned positively in a footnote, something like that. And I confronted this author and said, well, it's very poor in referring to women. And he says, yes, there are 2, and 1 is mentioned positively. And he wasn't even ashamed. So it is not even though we are living in modern and equal times, it is not a given. So I think we need to be insistent, because there are many little bits and pieces that actually build or destroy for a world of equality, and also making visible the role women actually are playing. I mean, that's the it's about quoting in academia. It's about other things in like public and political life, to make the women actually visible for the role they are playing, at least as visible as men are. And I also think, as people, as women of faith, we live certainly under very different circumstances, and yet we can recognize things in each other and cultivate that sense of togetherness, and empower each other in this. I think is also very important for interfaith praxis. I have quite recently, well, last year or so, been elected into the executive committee of Religions for Peace. And I am increasingly impressed with the efficiency and the potential of multi-faith approaches to the really important questions that humanity is facing, and also about the inclusion of women. Of course, there are still very few globally, very few female leaders for religious communities, but there are some, and they're often very powerful. So it's moving, and we need to move it.
We need to move it, definitely. To all of our listeners and viewers right now, this might be your last chance to ask your questions and to post your comments in the comment section below our conversation. I see some more questions and comments in here, and related to again the topic of patriarchy. Yeah, I guess there's a question from Teresa. This is something that we hear in Poland quite a lot, especially from men quoting certain passages from the Bible to like convince us that women should not be in the position of leadership. So Teresa also was quoting passage from the Bible, from the letter of Saint Paul to Corinthians, that the head of every man of the church is the Christ. In turn, the head of a woman is the man. So just like Christ is the head of the church, the man is like the head for a woman. And also there is this popular quote that people would use in Poland that I guess is also from one of the St. Paul letters, that women are supposed to stay silent and are supposed to like cover their body, their heads. That's also used quite often to teach Catholic women in Poland that maybe it shouldn't be them in the leadership position. So there is this question from Teresa. So what does these passages actually mean? Do they really mean that women should not be in positions of power, in positions in leadership, at least in the church?
Of course, I would say no, because what Paul says about women should be silent is addressed to a congregation, to a certain congregation where there is some disorder that he wants to address. Because you could say, okay, the same Paul says, in Christ there is no man or woman, no male or female, no Jew or Greek, no slave or free. We are all one in Jesus Christ. So it is always difficult if you take a certain verse from the Bible out of its context and make this the rule that applies to everything. You need to look to the context. And yes, there are several passages in the Bible that you actually could put, if you put them out of the context and next to each other, then they really contradict each other. And of course you have in the I mean, a good example is always for not a good memento to not do this kind of interpretation of the Bible is to look at all the things that are in the Old Testament of regulations that nobody abides to. Now, why should you abide literally to this verse, but then you say, no, this verse about what you should eat or not eat or how you should dress, that doesn't apply to us. So you have to look at the whole, and also look at how Jesus treated women, actually. But it is a sad feature of religion, of religious patriarchy, that it is used to hold back women. In the Church of Sweden, our international work is very much rights-based. We base it on human rights, because when you do international work, you can't come and say, in the first place, quote Bible verses. You need to put it in this more sort of secular language, and then you often use the human rights language. And in November 19, I was in Nairobi. It was the 25th anniversary of the International Conference on Population and Development. And it was very interesting. It was very much about the rights of women, and this SRHR, which means sexual and reproductive rights and health. And it is, and of course, in the Catholic Church, it is especially problematic to talk about these rights. But what I learned is, in the end, sexual and reproductive health and rights is a win-win concept, because it gives women knowledge about their own bodies, and by that also the means to treat themselves and their relationships responsibly. And we know that societies that are gender just will flourish more than those who aren't. And we need to, if this strategy is going to be successful, we need to involve faith communities, because we know that a majority of people on the earth actually belongs to faith communities. We also know that faith communities have stable access to people, even in areas where state power is rather weak. And we also know that change of behaviors and lifestyles involves intrinsic values and spirituality. And then you see that some churches are more part of the problem than part of the solution. But churches are and also have been part of the solution. And sometimes I think that church traditions are actually challenged by what seems to be the secular world, but the secular world is so deeply shaped, especially in Europe. It is very deeply shaped by the fruits of Christian teaching for centuries and centuries and centuries. So if the secular society asks, what about freedom? What about equality? What about rights? It's often the fruit of our own preaching, and we better listen and be self-critical to understand. And we have, as Christians, we have a sound theological basis for promoting these kinds of rights, because the Creator created humans equal, endowed with reason to understand nature, even including our sexual nature, and bodies matter to God, because God, according to Christian faith, took a human body in Christ. So that makes me think that we should keep at these and working at these questions and do it together and cultivate perseverance and this hope that has room for anger about injustice and humility when it comes to our place in creation, and courage to change. And we should challenge false theologies. I know that's not always easy, but we should challenge false theologies and lift up research that shows the effectiveness of gender justice work, and lift up good examples both at the governance level and at the grassroots level, and empower women in leadership. And the last thing, and not the least thing though, is that we need to provide safe and brave spaces for difficult conversations, and keep those conversations going with respect and committed to the basic tenets of our faith.
We're definitely going to do that, not only today, but also tomorrow here on Salam Lab. We're going to continue our conversation about religion and peace with Mrs. Izabela Czechowska from a Polish Muslim community and Mrs. Miriam Zinger from a Polish Jewish community. So join us tomorrow for this discussion at 8 p.m. as well on Salam Lab Facebook. And as for today, Archbishop Jackelén, thank you so much for your great contribution, also for being a great example, not only for me and Carol's work, but also for me personally. You're a great leader and great role model, a person who definitely motivates me personally and helps me to build this capacity in safe spaces for peace and equality here in Poland. So thank you very much for being here with us tonight, and thank you very much for being a great example for me as well.
Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure and a joy, and blessings on your work.
Thank you. And we encourage all of you to join us tomorrow and on Friday for our conversations on peace. You're going to find all the details about those events on our Facebook page. You can also follow Archbishop Jackelén on Facebook and Instagram. So please find her and give her your love and support because we need lots of support for great women leaders. Once again, Archbishop Jackelén, thank you so much, and have a good evening and good night.
Good night. Thank you.